Hello, I'm Caroline Fairchild, and welcome to Working Together Live, a show about equity in the workplace with leaders changing the face of business. Live events, an industry that was booming prior to the pandemic, has dealt with its fair share of turmoil, to say the least, in the past couple of years. And yet, the CEO of this major events platform says the crisis brought on positive change for her firm. Joining me now is Julia and co-founder of Eventbrite, an American event management and ticketing website. She also serves on the board of directors at Four Seasons Hotels and UCSF's Foundation Investment Company. She's also a Henry Count Fellow from the Aspen Institute. She got her BA in telecommunications from Pepperdine University. Julia, welcome to Working Together Live.
Thanks so much for having me.
It is so great to see you. Like I said before we started, I wish we were doing this in person, but this will have to do for now. This has just been such an exciting, I'm using the word exciting to be optimistic here, 2 years for you. If you can, let's go back to the beginning of the pandemic. I've heard you said before that the company that you created in 14 years, it just cratered in the matter of 14 days. What was that feeling like? Take us through what that was like as a leader at the beginning of this crisis.
Well, it has been a really exciting 2 years. I mean, every month we're learning something new, and the world is changing. So I would say that's a good, not just an optimistic term, but an accurate one. Back in March of 2020, which feels like, I don't know, a decade ago now, we were stunned by everybody by the speed of which this pandemic overtook life as we knew it. And I think anybody who says that they could have accurately predicted this is probably not telling the full truth. So, as the pandemic hit, Eventbrite and other live experience and travel companies really early in the cycle, we were the tip of the spear, and it was pretty surreal. Yet I think in that moment of great and utter disruption for our customers' businesses, clarity became, something that I could really rely on. It became very clear what we needed to do, and it was, it was interesting to think about the fact that somebody said to me, "You're about to become a wartime CEO," and I had never really connected with that term, and yet it became very clear what that meant almost immediately, which was organizing the work that needed to be done to not only help our customers, but to help our Brightlings, and then ultimately save the company's future. And I did whatever any great leader would do. I made a spreadsheet.
Yeah, exactly. That's where you start. At least that's what my husband would say. I'm not as good with the spreadsheets as he is. Let's connect some of the themes that you just hit on. So being the tip of the spear, getting that clarity, and then soon realizing that, in fact, you were a wartime CEO. What did the tip of the spear look like? And when did you realize that this wasn't a term that maybe your advisors were telling you was going to be your experience, but you said, okay, this actually, maybe I am a wartime CEO right now?
Well, when you think about the 30 days in March of 2020, right, there was the beginning where I think that there was some pretty understandable denial, wondering how much this would impact our lives. There was the middle, which was complete and utter chaos, right? Remember when we all got sent home from our offices and we thought, oh, we'll see you all in a couple of weeks. And then there was the action part. And I think that's really what my advisors, our board of directors, those who care about the company, who aren't on the board, investors, my team, we all basically flipped into action in the latter part of March. And, again, referencing the tenure of Eventbrite, 14 years in the making, and in 14 days, we saw demand for live events not only reverse, but also events getting canceled and postponed to the point at which we were generating negative revenue. And I'll never forget the day that our Tableau dashboards broke. We hadn't set them up to actually handle a scenario where we would be processing more refunds than revenue. And as bad as it was for us, it was 1,000 times worse for our customers, for our event creators who are solopreneurs and small business owners who had put their own money on the line to produce events. So it was complete and utter chaos, but we really came together quickly. And I think that the inciting question that I asked the team that I think really got us to a place of moving faster than most companies to really prepare for the future was, what would we do if we could do it all over again? And that was probably not the question that my team was expecting me to ask at that time, but it actually was a really important question for us to consider as we thought about strategy for how we were not only going to get through the crisis, but beyond it and be able to help our customers.
Well, I want to get to that refreshing point of view that I think you have in terms of using a crisis as a way to disrupt and think differently about things. But before we do, I just, some of the challenges that you faced early on in April of 2020, you had the challenging decision to lay off nearly half of your staff. I don't have to tell you that we've seen many tech CEOs do that really poorly recently. How did you approach that? And what was that like, having to have those conversations amid the disruptions of the business, amid the disruptions to your own life?
Well, it was, as a leader, it's just about the worst thing that you can, do, that you can come to the conclusion of, and then really, hold that space to have that both personal guilt as well as just the, kind of horrifying reality that this is where your business is. And so again, this was in the span of 4 weeks from the minute COVID hit the business to when we announced our layoffs. And let me tell you why that was so important to me. So there were 3 things that became clear. One was that we weren't going to be able to get through a period of time where we had negative revenue, where events actually weren't allowed to happen, and be able to be a company on the other side of that and really be able to help our customers. So big changes had to happen. And that became clear. And that was a really difficult realization, but it was black and white. So there really wasn't any gray in it. So the first thing that mattered to me is that we could do this in a human way. And I think in that chaotic time, it was hard to find those points of human connection. I mean, remember, we were not used to being apart from each other. So this is all happening virtually. So that meant that I wanted everyone to hear it from me first, and then from another Brightling, to have a one-on-one conversation within the first 24 hours of the announcement. And I thought that even if those 2 people had never met before, having that one-on-one conversation and having a human moment about this would mean all the difference in the world to the people who are impacted, both the people who are staying and the people who are transitioning. The second thing was that I wanted to do it quickly because in March and April of 2020, there was a big question as to whether or not the bottom was going to fall out of the entire job market. Nobody predicted that we would have a bull market in 2020 and 2021. So I wanted everyone who was leaving Eventbrite to be able to land in their next job as quickly as possible. And that's why we did it so fast, why it was just, early April was our decision. And the third thing was I wanted them to have support. So we kept our entire talent acquisition team on, and we assigned a recruiter to a Brightling who was leaving and almost like reverse recruited them from the business. I'll tell you really quickly, one thing that happened that I didn't expect, that I wasn't planning for, is by the end of the day, on April 8th, the day that we announced our layoffs, a former Brightling had started a Google spreadsheet, here's another spreadsheet reference, and had asked other former Brightlings through LinkedIn and whatnot to post where they were working and what they were hiring for. And by the end of the day, we had 100 companies listed on that. And so just to see the power of the network and the power of the Brightling alums come together, it was sort of this heartwarming moment in a very cold and sad time.
To that point, I just think the communities that we saw sprout up across companies, not just tech companies, but every company that had to go through layoffs when it comes to the job market was pretty amenable, and something that I hope brings the humanity, as you put it, back into the job search process. I certainly know that we hope that here at LinkedIn. So Julia, you've gone through this massive disruption in your business. You've done one of the hardest things that a CEO has to do, which is go through a mass round of layoffs. You've understood that you're now this wartime CEO, but then there was this moment of clarity for you where you thought that maybe you could do things differently. Talk to us a little bit about what that moment was and how you started to view your role as CEO differently, and also what Eventbrite's culture was differently.
Well, I didn't there's no elegant way to go through a transition like that and to lay off that many people of whom you've worked together for years. And so, there's a humane way, and I don't think it's actually that difficult to really be authentic. But the one thing that mattered most to me was that those people weren't losing their jobs in vain, that we weren't just cutting off, parts of the company to try to survive. So prior to the layoffs, what we did was we asked ourselves that critical question. And that question of, given what we know about the business, what would we do if we could do it all over again, gave us the basis to reimagine the strategy for the company. We knew that we couldn't bring everything with us, right? So what were we going to take forward? And we based our decisions on how to reshape the business and how to resize the business based on that. So it was based on a strategic point of view of, where are we best? How do we differentiate against other platforms that our customers could use? And where do we know we can win and really help our customers? And what we came up with was a deep, deep focus on frequent creators. So event creators who are coming to Eventbrite to use the platform as their operating system, because they're hosting at least one event a month, many times more than that. And we wanted to create and reinforce the self-service technology that we've built in order to make them more efficient so that they can spend more time on creating the magic, which is the content of their live experience. And we also wanted to help them build audience. So reach a bigger audience of people, whether it was when they were pivoting to online events during 2020 and taking that same content, but reaching a global audience, or pivoting back to in-person events in 2021 and doing what they do and creating unique and local events on the platform, but reaching even more people so they could build their business back faster. And that was the basis of the strategy that we deployed in March. We went back and refined it for a longer term vision in September of 2020. But that really helped us anchor around the decisions that we had to make and made those really tough decisions have meaning and resonance. And for that, I felt like we were making the right choices in the right way and not just panicking.
Right. Well, Julia, just hearing you speak about this reinvention, I'll go out on a limb. You can tell me if you think I'm wrong. That's not necessarily something you've had a lot of experience in. I've heard you say that the company that you and your now husband started to build in 2009, the thesis statement behind that, what you were pitching investors in 2009, didn't change very much, which is pretty much unheard of when it comes to Silicon Valley startups. So given that legacy of you knowing pretty much right off the bat what this company was going to be, how did you find the energy to reinvent it amid one of the most challenging times for any CEO?
Well, the first and foremost, it was because I was surrounded by great people. I mean, I think, almost cosmically, great executives came around the table at the right time to really help reinvent this company, this 14-year-old company, in a way that wasn't a pivot, but it was really almost like a redefining of what was most important to us. And the benefit that we had was, given our tenure, the one thing I did know was where we came from, right, and our strengths. But given the tenure of the team, as well as some of the fresh perspectives of executives who had landed maybe 6 months prior, we were able to think about, well, what's most critically important to this set of customers? And then how would we reshape the company to do things differently in a way that we all knew we wanted to do, but would have taken probably 5 years longer to make those changes if we had made them incrementally. Mm-hmm. So I do think that, when you step back from the traumatizing experience of letting go of half of our staff and seeing our teammates transition into other companies and other roles, or just the trauma of the pandemic and how it impacted all of our lives, I actually think about words like fortunate and timing. And those aren't like words that you would think related to a pandemic that almost destroyed our company. Mm-hmm. But it really was that opportunity for us. We were fortunate to have the opportunity to rebuild, and the timing was such that we could really move the company in a way that would have taken just a much longer amount of time had we not had this massive disruptive event.
Hearing you speak, Julia, I think there's a reason why you're a CEO and I'm a journalist. I don't think I could have done it. But before we go on, I do want to say hello to some members who are joining us in the stream. We have Danielle, who says, such a great example of leading with empathy and acting with compassion. Bravo, Julia Hartz. And we have Christine saying, crisis often brings about innovation, which was certainly true for Eventbrite. So Danielle and Christine, thanks for joining us on Working Together Live. Julia, let's talk a little bit about the culture, quote unquote, of Eventbrite, which is a buzzword that I really do not like. But you said something on an Inc. podcast recently that I want to bring up about culture. You said, if a company is going through a really hard time, the culture doesn't have to be the antidote to that. It can actually be the foundation from which you go through the hard time and make the tough decisions. This stood out to me because I feel like I speak to so many CEOs who they want to keep the bedrock of the foundation that they had, say, when they founded the company, in your case in 2009, or maybe even prior. They want to make that the same so that the talent remains the same and the gist of the company, I guess, remains the same. But you don't think that. Why?
Well, I always, I'm a visual thinker. So I always think when somebody asks me, how do you preserve a culture? I always think about a bug stuck in amber. And, that's the opposite of what I've thought of as a great culture. I mean, just to step back from it a little bit abstractly, I think about culture as a manifestation of the people at the company at that time. So by virtue of that, people come and go all the time, a little bit more often these days. And a culture is constantly adapting. It's constantly moving. It's like a living, breathing organism. And if it has the right foundations, if we have the right principles and values, we're always evolving forward, right? We're always getting a little bit better. But in order to get better, you have to go through change and failure and disruption. And I always thought that, Eventbrite shouldn't be a culture that is always happy. And that's actually something that oftentimes gets misconstrued at the company, because I seem like an always happy person who, admittedly, I'm always seeing the opportunity in a bad situation. I'm always looking at the opportunity, and I think I'm inherently optimistic. But that doesn't mean that I'm not willing to go through tough times. And I think that right now, especially, we're all so deeply uncomfortable about this ongoing pandemic, about the trauma of either losing loved ones or seeing loved ones lose loved ones, or being socially isolated, that we're all sort of grasping at something that can make us feel better, that can, give us some assuredness. And I think that because of that, sometimes people try to use their culture as an antidote, or they try to make big predictions and proclamations about what it's going to be like to work in the future. And I think one of the things that I really appreciate about Eventbrite and what we've built is that we walk it. We don't just talk it. So for instance, this week we're experimenting with asynchronous work. And, I started the week looking at my calendar, realizing all of my touch points and ways in which I don't get, lonely in this guest bedroom in my house is through meetings on Zoom. And I had to think of new ways to connect with people that didn't include those meetings. So I had this sense of loss and almost panic, frankly, on Monday morning. But many people in the company looked at their calendar and went, wow, I get to actually put my head down and think about long-term objectives and goals and get work done. And I'm not always interrupted by all these meetings. And I think ultimately we don't know what the future of our work is going to look like. But what I do know is that it will be authentic to Eventbrite, and it'll land somewhere in this spectrum, right? These extremes are probably not serving us pretty well, but actually finding the edges of what works and what actually creates connectivity and productivity is going to be, the most important thing for us as we keep moving through this experience.
Julia, I'll have to ask our fact checker, but I'm pretty sure you're the first guest on LinkedIn Live to say that they were sad that they had fewer meetings on their calendar in the morning. I don't think that we've heard that here on the show, but I'll get back to you.
No, it's pretty pathetic.
No, I think I would be the same way. So out of curiosity, how did you get those touch points that wasn't just the Zoom fatigue of constantly being in meetings?
I started calling people. Yeah, I first called our CFO, Lanny Baker, and, realized that he wasn't in a meeting either. So we could just start talking about things that we don't have time to talk about when we're in the day-to-day operating space. Yeah. And I started to find new places on Slack where people were hanging out. I found a party in the async Slack channel. So I joined that. I started to learn, new people's names and stuff. I mean, I say it tongue in cheek, but honestly, what I'm appreciative of is that we're willing to try new things. Our next experiment is core working hours, where we're trying to figure out across the globe where we're distributed in many different countries at 700 bright links all over the world. How do we start to be more intentional about syncing our core working hours versus people having to stretch and be on calls all throughout the day, 24/7. I mean, that doesn't scale. So we're trying to find those ways in which we can connect with the sweet spot of how someone works great. And as a leader, I mean, frankly, my intention, my motivation is for people to be able to do their best work at Eventbrite, to be able to make connections that lead to lifelong friendships, and to be able to experience great leadership, right? And in any form. And I think that we are in the first inning of this wild game of change. And I also think that if you zoom out and look at, where we're going in this cycle of the pandemic, this isn't the first variant we've seen. It's not the last. We're going to keep going through tough times. So it's better for us as leaders to be honest about that. And it's better for us, frankly, as a business, especially in our business, to be thinking about how we actually gain strength in those cycles and how we help our customers continue to think about, as people reemerge and the demand surges for live experiences, how do they help them gather? We've seen this now in 3 distinct cycles just since COVID started. And I think it will continue to grow. The final thing I'll say about it is that my optimistic side thinks that we're all getting a little bit more compassionate.
Yes, absolutely.
This last cycle has caused us to really dig in and care for one another in a way that I don't know that we truly had before.
Well, I think that's just because we're all in each other's homes now. You can't think that we're robots who power on and off when we get into the office floor. So you have to think about, I saw that person's dog, or I saw that person's kid, I saw that person's bookshelf. Picture of my grandmother on top of my head over here. I think that is, humanizing. But Julia, going back to those core working hours, that's what Slack is doing. Stuart was on the show last year and he talked to us about that. So I'm sure you could ping him and get any tips on those core working hours. I also do love the visual of the CEO on a Monday morning, lurking in a Slack channel, being like, will you hang out with me? What's your name? I think that's amazing. So I appreciate you sharing that. All right, I've made you spend a lot of time in the wartime time of Eventbrite. Let's bring us back to present day. What's going on with Eventbrite now? Where's growth? I'd love to get a sense of what you are looking at moving forward.
Well, Eventbrite is a profitable company that is most importantly focused on building a self-service platform and tools for event creators to reach anyone for any type of event. And what we're seeing is just this incredible rise of community connection. And I think it started when we all were abruptly held away from each other and isolated in March of 2020. And then it began to adapt into finding new ways to connect online. And then it adapted into really valuing the way in which we spend the time in our lives. There's a lot of talk around work-life balance. I think it's really about the value of life and how we spend our time. And so as we look forward, Eventbrite's poised to help all creators all over the world really create this new revolution of live experiences. Because at the end of the day, the one thing that many things have changed, many things that we don't even know have changed. But the one thing that hasn't changed is the human need to gather. And, I always like to run somebody through a quick exercise of think about something you watched or read or listened to in the last week that, impacted you. For me, it might be, I'm very late to the game, but I just started watching Ted Lasso. So it might be like an episode of Ted Lasso that I watched before bed.
Absolutely. Well,
and now think about your first concert. I could tell you what it smelled like, felt like, sounded like, who I was with, where it was, down to the detail. That's the difference between live experiences and our everyday life, right? Absolutely. So that intention of coming together is something humans need to thrive. And it's really important that we think carefully about how we gather in the future and how we come back together, because that's going to mean a lot to how we, how we're able to operate through and past this time.
I'm depressed to say that it took me a good 30 seconds in my brain to even remember what my husband and I watched last night on TV. And it was This Is Us, which is a pretty emotionally cathartic show. And I couldn't even remember it. So I agree. I think that's a great analogy.
But what was your first concert?
Well, we talked about this, Julia. I don't remember my first concert, but I went to Taylor Swift for her season opening in Japan, and I could tell you everything. And of course, my husband bought the tickets in the U.S. We were literally, it was this huge amphitheater. We were in the final row of this thing. Like Taylor Swift was like yay big, and I could tell you everything about that night. And I still have a T-shirt to prove it, which was amazing.
There you go.
Respect. Yeah. Exactly. All right, we wouldn't be LinkedIn. A little bird told me that you're hiring for a pretty important position right now for your chief people officer. A lot of people are looking for people in that function right now. Talk to us about how you hire, how you particularly hope to work with this person.
Thank you, little bird. We are hiring for a chief people officer right now, along with, 5,000 other companies. I think that when I think about what's most important in a chief people officer at this stage of our company and who we are as a company, I'm actually looking for someone who doesn't like people, but who is obsessed with people, who loves people, because at the end of the day, that's what makes a company great. And I've thought that from the very early days of starting Eventbrite, before it was cool to talk about culture and to focus on people. But I do think that I'm looking for somebody to join our executive team and pick up the shared ownership of this strategy and vision that we've created. And I think that's probably what's most unique about our position, is that we are a team of 9 people who are shoulder to shoulder, supporting each other and leaning in and focused on building this platform for the future of live experiences. And so we're not just looking for someone to come in and put processes in place and, handle issues as they arise. We're actually looking for a business mate. And I think that is where chief people officers should be, is in the boardroom, is in the all the executive decisions that are being made about strategy. Because I know that when I was not CEO of this company, but I had a nebulous title of president, I had the luxury of coming to every major decision thinking about how it would impact the Brightlings. And my North Star is to build a great company. I think that's what we should use this once in a lifetime chance to do. And I mean, that includes a really strong business, but it also includes a lot more, which is who we are, what we stand for, how we operate. And this is just a really exciting time to build. So I think that, most of all, we have had this incredible opportunity to rebuild a legacy company that knows who it is, but also has all sorts of interesting problems and questions to answer in the future.
Absolutely. And I know that you're a big proponent of hiring people who are not like you, which I would say as someone who has to hire people in the past is one of the hardest things to do. But I do actually think that is important as well. Julia, before I let you go, so many people on LinkedIn and off right now are trying to pivot careers, pivot industries. A fun fact about Julia is that she started in TV production. She worked on the set of Friends, set of Nip Tuck, and then decided to go to Silicon Valley, start your own company. Advice for people who are trying to make maybe similar decisions, at least maybe switch industries entirely right now?
Well, gosh, it's such a different time now. I feel like entrepreneurship has become so much more accessible. So that's exciting. I mean, I was involved in an event called BFF last night that's celebrating Web3 and crypto and bringing women into this amazing new frontier. And I was just struck by how many women entrepreneurs and founders were on the call. And so that excites me. So I think, jump in, the water's warm. You have a lot of support around you in terms of other people who are doing the same thing, who are maybe building businesses or trying to get to product market fit and building families. And that's totally possible. It's not easy, but it's possible. I also think that just with the democratization of knowledge and education, there's many ways in which to learn kind of new skills that can take you from where you are to where you want to be as a founder. And then don't do it alone. Find a co-founder. If you're thinking about starting a company, definitely spend time thinking about who could be your complementary skill set because I can tell you from direct experience, that makes all the difference in the world. It helps you get from point A to point B 10 times faster. So I think that would be off the cuff some of my advice if I were to go back and talk to my 25-year-old self when we were starting Eventbrite.
All right, this is a gimme. Should everyone do it with their husband then, like you did?
No.
Okay.
No, but I do think more and more I'm getting outreach from amazing founding teams who are a couple, and sometimes I don't even know that, and then I'm like, oh, that's great. I mean, I think there are when we were starting, it was very few and far between, and we got our original kind of playbook from Michael and Sochi Birch, who founded Bebo. And I think that what I'm most proud of is the fact that we did adopt principles like divide and conquer, or like having an exit strategy if things started to get too tense and it started to get between us as parents or us as a couple. But I also think it's such a wonderful thing when it works out. I mean, when you think about the amount of trust you can have in your partner and then being able to work with them as founders, it's pretty unique. So I tend to like to say, that's a privilege if you can make that work. So do everything you can to be mindful about, keeping it healthy.
I'm going to say I'm not going to be someone who starts a company with my husband anytime soon, but I'm going to adopt. I read that when you were in conflict about the business with your husband, you guys would hold hands and try and talk about it. So I think the next time I fight with my husband, I'm just going to adopt that.
Wait. We turned the lights off, laid down on the floor in our windowless phone closet office in a warehouse in Potrero Hill and hold hands.
Yes.
So a little bit of that was just it was ridiculous, but it did help.
I can't wait to try it, and I'll email you after that. Julia, thank you so much for joining us on the show. I'm seeing some comments. Michael says, I agree with the compassion comment. About 30 years in business, I began to change my whole approach. And Tanya says, being open to hearing perspectives from new staff is so important, especially when you are forced to pivot during uncertain times. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope to have you back sometime soon.
Oh, thank you, Caroline. It's great to see you.
All right, that was Julia Hartz. She is co-founder and CEO of Eventbrite, walking us through the tumultuous couple years that she's had and how she's come out better at the other end. I want to thank her for joining us on the show. And thank you for your comments. Just so you know, Working Together is not just a live show. We are also a weekly newsletter that hits your inbox every Wednesday morning. For more on equity in the workplace and the latest changing the face of business, subscribe by hitting the link that my producer is putting in the comments right now as we speak. All right, on next week's Working Together Live, Thursday at 3 Eastern, we're talking about working parents and the challenges they continue to face. Clio CEO Sarah Jane Sarketti will be with us to chat through how employers can support, get this, parents first workplaces. That's 3 Eastern next Thursday, February 3rd. I'm Caroline Fairchild. Thank you so much for joining us.